Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Can I add my welcome to that of the two Pauls to this special evening? I would say, if you don't know who I am, but I guess you've got a bit of a clue on the screen here just beside us, but my name's Graham Henderson. I'm Vice-Chancellor of Teesside University, and I'm delighted that our university is one of the sponsors of the North East Economic Forum, and so it's a great personal privilege for me to have been given the opportunity to introduce the First Minister, Alex Salmond, MSP, to our region. So, Alex, I'm sure I speak for everybody in the room when I say we're absolutely delighted that you've given up your time. You're a very busy guy, we know that, but thanks for coming along, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And I'd just like to say it's fitting, some of you may not know this, but this week is Global Entrepreneurship Week. And so I think to have Alex here during Global Entrepreneurship Week is very fitting at a time when economic growth is so important to all of us, both sides of the border. And so I'd just like, if I may, to say just a few sentences about the links between education and business, and then I'll say a few words of introduction of our speaker, if I may. As Vice-Chancellor of Teesside, I can honestly say I'm proud to work for an organisation that just absolutely believes in everything we do. We try and place ourselves at the heart of economic change. That's just what gets us out of bed in the morning, I think. Whether it's about new business startups, if I tell you, some of you may have heard me say this before. In the last 2 years, Teesside has started 172 new small businesses in 2 years. We hope we provide the much needed skills to try and deliver economic growth. We drive enterprise innovation within regional business and in our local communities. And I'm sure I know I speak for all the Vice-Chancellors in the region and all of my colleagues in higher education, further education, many of whom are in the room this evening, when I just say that I'm sure we all share that same passion and commitment to just doing the best we can to drive social, cultural and economic change. That's really important. And I think we genuinely are aware of the role that we have by using our resources, which are not insignificant, and the expertise we have, which is not insignificant, to just help try build a sustainable economic base here in the North East. And, we all take a great interest in the way things happen north of the border, and I think we look at that all of the time, as you might expect. And I think it is important the way Scotland, in my view, have prioritised education, not just education, but high-quality education. The way in which they've dealt with a whole series of thorny issues, fees, student support funding, post-student work for international graduates, which has been a big issue for us. Beginning to sensibly, in my view, coordinate and rationalise the way in which post-compulsory education, vocational and professional education is provided on a regional basis, and I think that's something you can learn from. And importantly for me, the way in which they've succeeded in recognising outstanding research, excellent research, wherever it exists around Scotland, and trying to support that by bringing people together in partnership. These are all major and difficult issues that I'm sure we look at the way Scotland are dealing with those issues and say we have a lot to learn from those. And I think if we can work together, we can optimise the benefit of higher education to the future of business in our respective communities. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I will, if I may, just move to introduce our speaker this evening. Alex, of course, doesn't need any introduction to any of you, but I am from a university and I am here in the North East, so I thought I'd just point out 3 facts to you that you may not know. First of all, Alex is a graduate of St Andrews University, where he gained a joint honours Masters in Economics and History. He's also been involved as a visiting Professor of Economics at Strathclyde University, and for somebody who's a Geordie boy, it's worth noting he's also a passionate Hearts supporter. And after saying that, you say, well, what else would you possibly need to know about Alex Salmond? Well, I guess the other thing he is of course, he's an outstanding politician, he's an outstanding speaker, and of course he's the leader of the Scottish National Party, serving as the member in the Scottish Parliament for Aberdeenshire East, prior to that of Gordon. Since May 2007, he's been serving as the Parliament's 4th First Minister. Alex was first elected as an MP in the UK Parliament 25 years ago, and he served as MP for Banff and Buchan from 1987 to 2010, including for a period being simultaneously a member of the devolved Scottish Parliament at the same time, following its inception in 1999, and then returning to the Scottish Parliament for a second time in 2007. He headed a minority Scottish government from 2007 to 2011, and then, as you will know, from May 2011, formed a government with an overall majority. And importantly, as we all know, a few weeks ago, he and David Cameron signed the Edinburgh Agreement, which will bring about the vote on independence before the end of 2014. So I'm sure, having said all of that, we all want to know Alex's views about what the opportunities that presents, what the challenges that presents for our nearest neighbours, for their nearest neighbours and our nearest neighbours. We share a lot of common issues. We share a lot of common industry sectors. There's a huge amount, I hope, we can learn from each other, and a huge amount we can do in partnership. And so without further ado, if I may, I just ask you to give a great North East welcome to our special guest, Scottish First Minister, the Right Honourable Alex Salmond, MSP.
Graham and ladies and gentlemen, I should thank Graham for a couple of things. Firstly, for an appreciation of our education strategy in Scotland, which sometimes eludes some of our members of the Scottish Press Corps, but you're absolutely correct in what you said in terms of the strategy we're pursuing, and also for mentioning that I'm a Heart of Midlothian supporter. Now, for those of you with your iPhones, you'll note if you go on to the web, and many people do during my speeches, that you'll find that there's better news on Heart of Midlothian tonight, which just shows you that the Scottish Government have now outlawed miracles in Scotland. Miracles can happen in Scotland, and therefore I can now tell you and reveal to this audience that I'm very confident in a year or so's time, just over a year, that Heart of Midlothian will take on Newcastle or Sunderland in the final of the European Champions League. And we fully expect to get the same sort of result that Celtic got against Barcelona last week. But I'm grateful indeed to Graham. Graham's a regular visitor to Scotland, but also it should be said that Teesside University makes a major contribution to the economy of the North East as an employer, as a champion for higher education, as a hub for applied research and enterprise, and has links, of course, with Glasgow Caledonian on key projects going forward. A good example of the cooperation that Graham mentioned. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I was very struck, as I tend to. I get all these press cuttings in every morning, and as soon as I can find a favourable one, I like to talk about it as much as possible. So I was very struck by the headline in the Northern Echo, a paper which is almost incomparable in this part of the world, I think exceeded only by the Newcastle Journal. Brian Aitken's about to question me in a few minutes' time, ladies and gentlemen. But the Northern Echo declared, I thought with a great amount of perception actually, the North East needs its own Alex Salmond report. That was the headline. It was actually quite a big headline as well. And basically, I'm here to argue that the very excellent report from the Institute for Public Policy Research, Borderland, argued that what the North East of England needed was me. Now, I have got to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, you had your chance, because in 1978, after I left the aforesaid St Andrews University, the very, very, very first job application. And these days it was kind of a leisurely thing. You know, you graduated and then you thought, you know, which company shall benefit from my services? You know, it was different days, ladies and gentlemen. I decided that the organisation best able to benefit from my services was the North of England Development Council, who were advertising for an economist. Unfortunately for me, the North of England Development Council decided they could do without me. And subsequent history could have been entirely different, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you could have had me back in 1978 when I arrived for that interview in this great city of Newcastle and was turned away and decided I must now campaign for Scottish independence. It was at that very moment that my future was determined. But that is absolutely true, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the first time I've made the train journey just down from Edinburgh. Also, I'm not the first Scot to, on the 13th of November, to come down these parts. This is actually the anniversary of the death of the only Scottish king to have been buried in Newcastle, Malcolm Canmore. He was Macbeth's successor for the Shakespeareans among us. He was buried at Tynemouth Priory in 1093, slain in battle for besieging Alnwick Castle. Well, serves him right, I think, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason he was there, he was leading a Scottish attempt to gain control over the northeast of England and Cumbria. And I just want to reassure this audience that although, like Malcolm Canmore, I recognise the importance and the value of the northeast of England, that unlike Malcolm Canmore, I'm coming here tonight with entirely friendly intentions. Mind you, if you do want to join us, then a deal could be done, ladies and gentlemen. When I represented Bath and Buchan in the Westminster Parliament in my youth as a politician, I had Eric Heffer, the Member of Parliament for Liverpool, used to sit right behind me in the opposition benches. And Eric had been a huge opponent of devolution in the 1970s, but the experience of Lady Thatcher persuaded Eric to reassess the politics of decentralisation. And so for my first few years of speaking in the House of Commons, I was aware of this gruff Liverpoolian accent behind me saying, "Remember, Alec, Liverpool's coming with you." So who knows? But I hope that the message tonight is rather more positive than the one that Malcolm Canmore brought to this part of the world 1,000 years ago. I want to set out why Scottish independence will actually bring opportunities for other parts of these islands and might bring particular opportunities to those parts which are closest to Scotland. And fundamentally, I want to reassure that the ties of trade, of family, of friendship, of business, of commerce between Scotland and the northeast of England are strong at present and will strengthen, in my opinion, after Scotland becomes independent. Now, the northeast and Scotland, through our shared history and geography, have, in my estimation, strong reason for taking common cause. We both played leading roles in the Industrial Revolution. We both suffered disproportionately as a result of the deindustrialisation of the 1970s and 80s. And partly because of that, we have become aware to the extent to which policy making in the United Kingdom has become over-centralised. Now, the Institute of Policy Research and the report I referred to a few seconds ago, this one here, Borderland, I read this report yesterday, and I reread it in a train coming down, because the kind of slow train that we have just now gives you time to read weighty reports. But the most shocking table in the entire report was from its previous analysis of the infrastructure expenditure announced 1 year ago in the Chancellor of the Exchequer's 2011 autumn statement. And the analysis in the report this evening found that planned expenditure in infrastructure amounted to £2,731 per head in London and £5 per head in the northeast of England. I'll just repeat these figures, and the report, incidentally, is a highly professional and balanced report, and I have every reason to have confidence in the figures. £2,731 per head in London and a fiver per head in the northeast of England. Now, I'm First Minister of Scotland, ladies and gentlemen. My obligation and responsibility democratically and everything else is to the people of Scotland. But if I was to treat any part of Scotland, from the Northern Isles to the Western Isles to the Highlands to the Borders to the southwest of Scotland, in that sort of disproportionate fashion, then I wouldn't expect to remain First Minister of Scotland ere long. That's a dramatic figure, particularly one as we approach the next autumn statement. We're running up in a few days' time to the 2012 autumn statement. And the mood music from Westminster is that, look, we've had 3 months of good employment figures. The recession's over. Problem solved. It's all been an unhappy illusion. Of course, if you take out the Olympic effect, the UK economy is bumping along the bottom at the present moment. And it would be tragic if the complacency from these few months of decent employment figures was to remove the urgency of effective economic action in order to tackle the circumstances we are now in, and the most effective way of all to tackle it is through capital investment in infrastructure and the economy. And when that capital investment is deployed, it cannot be deployed in one area of the country. It has to be deployed. And then, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, there is an argument, a very strong argument, which I'll go on to make, that actually the reverse should happen. If you were actually conducting an efficient economic policy for the country of England, and you were facing the current economic circumstances, then you'd actually arrive at a situation where capital spending per head in the north east of England was £2,731, and capital spending elsewhere would be lower than that, because you would assess the capacity of the economy, the skills of the labour force, the dangers of overheating certain aspects of skills, and you would say to deploy where the economy would get the most productive potential benefit from your investment. Clearly, that doesn't happen at the present moment. Now, it may be an extreme example from the report, but that sort of imbalance helps to explain the findings and other research cited by the Institute of Public Policy Research. In the north of England, only 10% of people think that the United Kingdom government looks after the interests of all parts of England more or less equally. 89% of people think the UK government pays particular attention to looking after London. Indeed, and this is the clincher, in London itself, 63% of people believe that the capital gets special treatment from the UK government. Now, the advent of a Scottish Parliament and devolution for Scotland, Wales, for Northern Ireland has provided a partial remedy, but only a partial one, to centralisation in these islands, or indeed within Scotland itself. The advent of a Parliament right now allows Scotland to protect our National Health Service, to sustain a National Health Service, something that is meaningful in that term, as opposed to a disintegrated, fragmented, privatised system, a National Health Service. It's enabling us to mitigate, although only to mitigate, the impact of welfare reform. And it's allowing us to do everything we can to promote economic growth within the limited powers that are available to us. Take one example, which I suspect may have a particular resonance in this audience. How about Scotland benefits from the work of our enterprise agencies, Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Development International? Now, I was on the Look North tonight. I'm also interested in that term, Look North. Was that devised because it suggests that people should be looking north, or was it devised for, I suspect, devised for other reasons as a title of a programme? But the argument was, look, aren't you coming here as a competitor? I mean, you're the guy who runs the country who managed to get the Amazon jobs, or another advantage over the northeast of England. But, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the politician who abolished the regional development agencies in England. I didn't do that. I am not the politician who left not just the northeast of England, but the regions of England without an effective development agencies in order to promote their interests. I thought it would be a long time in politics before I agreed with anything that Michael Heseltine had to say, but I read his report last week, and if we took out the cartoons and the reinterpretation of history and all that sort of stuff, I just got to the guts of it. I did agree with the guts of it. It might just be that economic decisions made in the northeast of England would suit the northeast of England better than economic decisions made in London. That was the guts of the report. I mean, it does seem to me self-evidently true that you'll get better economic decisions made by people who stay and live and work and prosper in the northeast of England than economic decisions for the northeast of England decided elsewhere. Mind you, if you've got £5 a head of capital spending to allocate, then regardless how good the decisions are, you might struggle to make an impact. But nonetheless, I had to agree with the central thrust of the Michael Heseltine report. Now, I can't influence United Kingdom government policy except by example, but we can work now and in the future, whatever constitutional future, with the northeast of England in a range of other ways. Renewable energy, the excellent film we saw a few seconds ago, is a good example. Now, the Offshore Renewable Catapult Centre will have its location at Strathclyde University in Glasgow. But its key operational base is in Northumbria, close to the National Renewable Energy Centre. For both the North East and for Scotland, renewable energy, particularly marine renewable energy, provides a significant opportunity. An opportunity to re-industrialise our economies, expand the manufacturing base by building and manufacturing and researching and development and servicing and maintaining these mighty machines which will power Scotland, England and hopefully much of the European continent in this century. And therefore it's vital for both of us that government policy, north and south of the border, is coherent and consistent in this matter. A couple of weeks ago, I was on site for the speech that never was. And this was a speech by the Junior Energies Minister, John Hayes, which he was to deliver in Glasgow, and was leaked in advance to the Mail and the Telegraph, a broad spectrum of the press in this country. Unfortunately for John, his speech was intercepted by his boss. So the speech that said that wind energy was to grind to a halt and come to a moratorium was never actually delivered. And he actually went to the Wind Energy Conference and made a very favourable renewable conference, made a very favourable speech towards renewables, because the bit that had been leaked was out of the speech because it had been removed by his boss, the Secretary of State. And then it was overruled the next morning by a statement from the Department, and the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions also said that policy was unaltered. But I do put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of, how shall we describe it, opaqueness, confusion, contradiction in policy can actually affect investment in the offshore wind industry. And if that happened, Scotland would suffer, but so too would the North East of England. Incidentally, so would the rest of England, because anybody who read the Ofgem report of a month ago knows that there is no margin, none whatsoever, in the English grid in terms of supply and peak demand as early as 2015. So yes, Scotland, North East of England, would suffer in terms of the lack of confidence in building up the manufacturing base to make the offshore wind industry a commercial reality. But people whose lights were going out, they would suffer as well from that sort of confusion and contradiction on policy. So, although in my estimation, Scotland and the North East will compete for investment in renewables, we will cooperate more often than we compete, and we can gain major joint benefits from the renewable revolution. Transport is another area where we share common ground and common interests. Yesterday and today, the Scottish Government hosted an event in Glasgow on the future of high-speed rail, which included representation from across England. Councillor Paul Watson here tonight, the leader of Sunderland City Council, was one of the panellists at the meeting in Glasgow yesterday. And after the Eurostar link was completed some years ago, with no further development of services beyond London, a report by the House of Commons Transport Select Committee said, and I quote, "The acquiescence of members of Parliament to the Channel Tunnel Act of 1987 depended on the provision of regional services. The view of the committee was, and I quote again, the regions have been cheated," unquote. Now, that mustn't be allowed to happen again with the next generation of rail investment. Because of devolution, because we have our own Parliament, because we have our own Transport Minister, you can be certain that Scotland will try and take a lead in ensuring that it doesn't happen. So yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy First Minister, announced our intention to invest in the first phases of high-speed rail without waiting for what's happening coming up the way. Because frankly, ladies and gentlemen, there's hardly a person in this room who will still be above ground if we wait for the progress of the high-speed rail coming up the way and do nothing else to try and facilitate that progress and to take initiatives now. So a link could be operational between Edinburgh and Glasgow with the capacity to join the high-speed line by 2024. That is 2 years before the London to Birmingham line is due to be operational, and perhaps at least a decade or more before there's any realistic chance of a line reaching this part of the world. So I think it's worth at least exploring whether we can start the process from the top down as opposed to the bottom up. I think our competitors, and in transport infrastructure, we don't just need to look at the big vision of high-speed rail. We should look at the rail franchise, the East Coast Line, which is hopefully going to be awarded successfully, unlike the West Coast Line, in the next couple of years. And what's our joint interest in that? What's our joint interest in the road infrastructure and connecting infrastructure? Our competitiveness in Scotland on the North East depends on investment in infrastructure, investment in connectivity. Scotland and this part of the world must work together to ensure we all benefit from the massive public investment proposed for high-speed rail. And I think this week's events and the cooperation that was so evident in Glasgow this week demonstrates that the political will is there to do that. And I can give you an absolute assurance you'll find the Scottish Government a willing, productive ally in making this case. But not just making the case, but doing what we have to do in leading by example. So, renewable energy and high-speed rail are examples, in my estimation, of the sort of cooperation between Scotland and the North East that already takes place and will gather pace, I hope and believe. On those matters, and indeed on many others, a strong Scottish voice is good for the North East of England. A strong North East of England is also good for Scotland. It's a good example how, even under devolution, by slightly changing the centre of economic gravity in these islands, has sometimes helped the North East and Scotland to work together. My estimation is, as that process continues, Scotland will be able to take its own decisions under independence, how to build a more fair and prosperous country. Because the fundamental argument for Scottish independence, like the fundamental argument for why economic decision-making will be better in the North East of England, is that the people best placed to make those decisions are the people who choose to live and work in Scotland. However, I believe it will bring opportunities for England as well as for Scotland. An independent Scotland can provide examples of innovative policy making in supporting industry, enhancing social protection, which I suspect will resonate in areas like this. It provides also an opportunity for the nation of England to reconsider its centralised model of government, which adversely affects a great deal of the country. And a more prosperous Scotland would be a close trading partner to the North East of England. The nearest city to Scotland is not Oslo or Dublin. Important though these cities are, and it's certainly not London, it's here. This is the nearest part of the world. You are our closest neighbours and should be our closest partners and closest friends in economic and social terms. Of course, economics in the world doesn't live by economics alone. Scotland and England would continue to share many other ties after independence. There's a wider social union among the people of these islands which would continue. People in Scotland will still enjoy the Grand National and Wimbledon, especially if Andy Murray gets round to winning it next year. Stephen Fletcher will still score for Sunderland. Now, I know that's a divisive thing to say in this audience, and we're hoping as he scores for Sunderland, he'll also hopefully score a few for Scotland. In culture, the National Theatre of Scotland production about boxing, Beautiful Burnout, opens in Newcastle tonight. And so these cultural exchanges obviously will continue and be accentuated. On a day-to-day basis, Scots, I can assure you, after independence, will still watch Ant and Dec in the jungle, and will still be cheering them on, if they manage to get a Tory MP out of here. Scotland will continue to share a monarchy with England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and most importantly, there will be enduring ties of family and friendship between people from the North East and Scotland. The idea that these things are dependent on the Parliament in London is nonsensical. They are dependent on the goodwill and shared humanity of our peoples, and by the close economic interconnection, which makes them a necessity. So Scotland and England after independence will be firm friends, equal partners, cooperating with each other on many areas of shared interests, but free to pursue our own policies when we see fit. Now, such a relationship of equal and independent allies, neighbours and friends is the one which makes the best sense. It will be good for the people of Scotland, I think good for the people across these islands, but I think in many, many ways, good in particular to our closest friends in the north east of England. Thank you very much.
Thank you, First Minister. Really interesting speech. I must admit I was looking forward to what you had to say, because you can tell from my accent I'm from the north east, but the north east of Scotland. Having represented, having been editor of the journal for 9 years now, so I kind of feel at home in this part of the world. And I think part of the reason why I feel at home in this part of the world is it does actually feel a little bit like what it is living in Scotland. So the people, the make-up, the whole thing about the region, there's a Scottishness to it that I can feel. I mean, obviously people who live here would maybe feel the same when they move across the border.
When I agreed to come, ladies and gentlemen, I said I had only one precondition, and that's I was interviewed by Brian. You know?
Yeah. And it was good news on Hearts today, by the way, and I think it's fantastic that you've been able to sort of do a deal without having to resort to your shirt sponsor for a payday loan to bail you out. Now, the format for this actually is we're going to take some questions from the floor. There's a couple of roving mics out there. I'm going to have to rely on the people with the roving mics to spot the people, because with these lights on me, I can't actually see a thing out there. What we're going to do is take 3 questions at a time. Sure. Just so that we can get maximum value from the First Minister here. So if anyone wants to start us off, Graham Mason. When you get the mic, could you just stand up, say your name and ask the question?
Neville Trotter, who actually served with you, Alex, in Parliament. I absolutely agree with what you said about the Channel Tunnel train service. Many of us supported it on the basis that it would come up here. I'm delighted that you're talking about HS2 being built south. You're quite right, if it isn't built south, it'll be a very long time before we get it up here. But can you assure us it will come down this side of the country? Because my worry is you might decide to build it down the west coast, and that would be a disaster for us.
Thanks, we're just going to take a couple of questions.
Sure, yeah, take a few.
Any more?
It's Graham Mason from Newcastle Airport. You can probably guess what the question's going to be about. It's about air passenger duty, where we've recently received a report from HMRC that indicates that if Scotland were able to abolish or significantly reduce APD, that we would lose hundreds of thousands of passengers to Edinburgh and Glasgow airports. And I was just wondering whether you agreed with that analysis or whether you disagreed.
Okay, one more for just now. We've got one there.
Hi, Anne-Marie Trevelyan from the Dual the A1 campaign. I'm very excited at the prospect that you plan to turn the country on its head and come south into England. That's great. It would be wonderful if you could perhaps start with the 8 miles left of the A1 that you haven't done, and then we'll carry on from there. If you'd like to help us go south, we'd be much appreciative. But there's 8 miles left in Scotland for you to sort out too. That would be fantastic, Mr. Salmond.
Well, if ever you were wondering about transport and connectivity being important to the North East, there's 3 questions, all with a transport theme.
Anne-Marie, somebody earlier on this evening said, said, look, we can always tell because as soon as we get across the border, the A1 improves so much. So what I'll certainly do is that will be part of the discussions which will be taking place between the great cities and local authorities of this area and the Deputy First Minister who's in charge of infrastructure and transport issues. I think we have to look at connectivity in the round. I think there's some immediate priorities and some immediate issues to focus on, but we've got to focus on other things as well. So that'll be part of the discussions. Say, Graham, it's interesting. It's not a report that HMRC have shared with the Scottish airports. I rather like this idea that they share a report with Newcastle Airport because they believe that air passenger duty devolution would result in expansion to Scottish airports. I think the report they'll probably share with the Scottish airports is their key analysis shows that the devolution will be a total disaster for the Scottish airports. You know, the targeting that we've got from the devolution air passenger duty is not the 5 million passengers, Graham, who come to Newcastle Airport. The targeting we've got is the 70 million passengers who go through Heathrow Airport. And it's for a very, very good reason. In economics, you're always looking for indicators. And we've got an absolute leading indicator which tells us what international tourism is doing in Scotland. And that's the visitor numbers at Edinburgh Castle. It's the top tourist attraction in Scotland, and about 80% or so of the visitors to Edinburgh Castle are from out of Scotland, for Scotland. January to June this year, visitor numbers to Edinburgh Castle were up 6%. In July and August, they declined by 20%. Why did they decline by 20%? Because the bulk of our international visitors come through Heathrow. And because they believed that they wouldn't be able to come through Heathrow because of the Olympics, in many cases they didn't come. It's absolutely devastating. And that's had a very substantial impact on the tourist industry in Scotland, because international visitors are obviously a very high value-added visitor number. So, you know, our attempt to get control of air passenger duty, and this report incidentally deals with the issue extremely well, so I would trust this rather than the HMRC. Our attempt to get control of air passenger duty is to increase direct connectivity with Scotland, with international destinations, to avoid being caught in the connectivity crisis that we are at the present moment. And you know, Howard Davis has been asked to look at connectivity to resolve this great dispute between David Cameron and Boris Johnson about whether there will be a third runway at Heathrow Airport. You know, if there's a third runway at Heathrow Airport, well, it's going to proceed at about the same pace, even if there is political agreement, as the high-speed rail link. And we have to do things now. And certainly that international connectivity is something we need. But our target, believe me, is not Newcastle's 5 million. It's to get the international connectivity to stop us being so totally reliant on connectivity through an airport in Heathrow, which, for reasons which you can understand the rationality of which the operators are cutting back substantially on flights into Heathrow from Scotland, so that they can allocate the slots they've got available to international flights which are more lucrative. And that's why we're arguing for air passenger duty. But the first question from my old colleague, yes, we were all... we should have realised that one, shouldn't we, that it was all just a game and a charade, and we should make sure it doesn't happen with high-speed rail. I can't obviously dictate the side of the country that the Westminster government chooses, but I cannot see why a high-speed rail system should connect all of the great cities from north to south, east and west in this country. I mean, why would you only want a high-speed rail system which connected some of the country? The whole basis of having a high-speed rail system is to get the advantage of distance and shrink the journey times. A year ago, almost exactly, I was speaking in the Communist Party Central School in Beijing, and the simultaneous translating, I was speaking about climate justice and the importance of Adam Smith and empathy and things, and the simultaneous translation broke down, which I was quite pleased about in a way, because it meant that their technology was as fallible as our technology. And my translator had to translate the speech, and when it came to questions, obviously I couldn't understand the question until it was translated. And the first chap from Shandong province, I think, stood up, and everybody laughed at his question. And I thought, what on earth is he talking about? As he asked me what the Scots wear under their kilt, or what has caused such hilarity in this audience. And his question was translated. What he said was this: I work for the Shandong Railway Company. We have very fast trains in China. Do you have fast trains in Scotland? And if not, can we sell you some? Which means we mustn't fear for Chinese entrepreneurship, but also gets us to understand the failings that there are in terms of the distance connectivity that's required in this country. So I think if we can look jointly at how we don't just lobby for the date of perhaps reaching Newcastle and Edinburgh to get forwarded from 2035 to 2034, but actually can see if we can take initiative like we're doing between our two great cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh. If we can at least talk about how we can make an initiative, how we can not wait for Godot, but for actually have something born in this part of the world in terms of moving forward, then I think it'll put us in a much stronger position for demanding East Coast, West Coast, but also will actually show that we are determined to, as far as we can, shape the future for ourselves as opposed to waiting for somebody else to deliver it from on high.
Have you given any thought to, once you've done Glasgow, Edinburgh, whether you do Edinburgh South or Glasgow South? Glasgow South to Carlisle or Edinburgh?
Well, the honest answer to that is no. I mean, we just made the announcement about Edinburgh Glasgow yesterday, but what I've undertaken is to let's have a discussion with the great northern cities in England to see what we can do together. Because no one, I don't think anybody can possibly believe that the timescale that's been set for us is acceptable or adequate. I mean, let's see what we can. I mean, and in all of these things, I suppose it's the people who make the initiative who are. If you make an initiative, by definition, you're in control of the route. So, you know, it's something. Let's get into discussion on, and as part of that discussion, we can discuss things that we know are pressing, like the next East Coast franchise, like the A1 and the 5 miles that I'm now going to be looking at. Yeah, but we can only do it step at a time, Anne-Marie, so we'll do 5 and 3. But the eight missing miles that we need to get into these discussions as well. But, you know, for goodness sake, let's, you know, we're in, as someone once said, who may or may not have meant it, we're all in this together, and certainly as far as infrastructure and connectivity is concerned, Scotland and the North East of England are most certainly in this together.
Okay, thank you. Right, any more questions?
Charles Reynard. First Minister, you touched upon the potential that renewable energy will provide for both the North East and Scotland, and also the role that marine energy might have. Clearly there are different maturities of these technologies insofar as offshore wind is more developed than the marine technologies are. Would you support, therefore, differential revenue support contributions for the various different technologies to enable them to reach that maturity before any irrevocable decision is taken as to which technologies should be taken forward?
Okay. And James?
James Ransbotham from the North East Chamber of Commerce. Mr Salmond, you've very much focused on transport, and indeed infrastructure remains a very key issue for the business community. But there is much more that we're also interested in. And you touched upon the Amazon issue, and of course we also had Gamesa, which was looking at 2 sites and ended up moving up north of the border. Now, competition is good for business, and we would acknowledge that. But also, we do believe to some extent of treat thy neighbour as thy would thyself. And are we really looking forward to a time of increased competition or increased partnership?
One more for...
Ed Cox from IPPR North. Very grateful for the references to our report and also the conciliatory approach taken to this evening. But I wanted to ask specifically about your tax intentions should Scotland become independent, and whether or not you agree with our report that actually your room to manoeuvre on tax might be less than perhaps is very often indicated.
Well, actually, I agreed with your report on page 24 when you said the SNP's commitment to a 20% rate of corporation tax looks more achievable. I thought that was quite favourable, actually, Ed. But, yeah, I mean, you describe it quite accurately. And I mean, corporation tax reductions, and this is where I incidentally agreed with your report as well, that I mean, the idea of reducing corporation tax, headline corporation tax, is an economic move which is aimed at getting headquarters of companies into your economy. It's not really a move that's aimed, for example, at getting an Amazon facility centre. You know, it's a move that's aimed at getting high value-added parts of the economy, which hopefully will pay corporation tax, and where it will be seen as a key advantage. And from that, then the economy benefits in terms of knock-on effects, in terms of having. I mean, if you take, for example, the Scottish economy and look at business growth rates, and I suspect you'll find something similar in the North East of England, that our key decision-making centre is in the oil and gas industry and hydrocarbons. And the business growth rate in that key decision-making centre of companies spinning out of major companies is hugely greater than elsewhere in the economy, not just because of the huge market and the booming market in oil and gas, but also because of it's a decision-making centre, and the people who go on to form their own companies come out of these key decision-making industries. So that's the idea in corporation tax is designed for that, as opposed, for example, to capturing branch offices of companies. On Amazon in particular, James, look, I'm First Minister of Scotland. It's my job to live and breathe fighting for every potential job that we can. It's actually, when we came into office in 2007, we actually put into the government's overarching purpose, reflected actually in our ministerial code, that the job of Scottish ministers is to increase sustainable economic growth in Scotland. That is the objective which overarches the entire business of government in Scotland. So, I live and breathe trying to get every possible economic initiative or beneficial impact on the Scottish economy. Isn't if I can quote again from the Northern Echo, and perhaps the Borderland Report, isn't the correct attitude for this part of the world to say, well, we should have influence that allows us to do that for the northeast of England, as opposed to saying we're hoping that that guy Salmond in Scotland will stop working to get jobs to Scotland. Believe me, this guy will keep working to get jobs to Scotland. That's my job. It really is. That's my responsibility. But I'd have thought the right thing for the northeast of England is to say, why haven't we got institutions which can give us that ability to focus decision-making and key job determination? And as I pointed out, I didn't abolish the economic agencies in the northeast of England. That was done by Westminster, not by me. And I would have thought, as this report indicates, that one of the focuses, however people want to do it, whether it's through an assembly, whether it's through, that's your decision. That's the decision of people collectively in this part of the world, how you want to focus that influence. But focus that influence you must, if you're not to lose out big style in terms of economic development. And incidentally, as the figures I quoted to you indicate, your real losses are not to Scotland, incidentally. Your real losses lie elsewhere. But that's for you to decide how you want to do it. But surely the fact that you have to do it is self-evident.
I guess if you get a vote for yes for independence, it would mean that Amazon won't be paying any taxes to the Scottish Government rather than not paying any taxes to the British Government.
Well, that's a fantastic journalistic point, but corporation tax ain't currently my responsibility, but my responsibility is jobs and investment. But it does indicate why a corporate tax initiative wouldn't necessarily be decisive as far as Amazon was concerned. And lastly, the point that was made about energy, I think it was Charles made the point about, yes, I do, absolutely. In fact, we control ROCs at the present moment, the Renewable Obligation Certificates, and this is exactly what we've done. And it's probably the best possible initiative that we've ever taken, because the production levels, for example, from wave and tidal energy are very small. Marginal at the present moment. ROCs are played on production. And when we increased the ROCs for wave and tidal energy, which gave Scotland a perceived decisive advantage, it cost the exchequer, or the public purse. ROCs work as awards anyway, but the effect was absolutely marginal in terms of finance. But the perception was very, very important for the industry, and the confidence that gave the wave and tidal sector, which is in an experimental and demonstrator phase. We now have we've got more wave and tidal machines in Scottish waters than the rest of the world combined, in terms of operating and producing electricity in demonstrator phase at the present moment. And awarding additional ROCs for wave and tidal had virtually no cost to the public purse, but was a very great signal to that industry that we had confidence in their development ability through the future. So yeah, I absolutely agree that you have to tailor the incentives in renewables to meet the pattern and timescale for how technologies will come to the marketplace. But the aim and intention must be to bring them to commerciality. We have a prize in Scotland just now, the Saltire Prize, which we're doing with National Geographic, and that basically the prize of £10 million goes to the company which can demonstrate commercial production in a fairly serious way of about 5 to 10 megawatts of wave and tidal power for 2 years out of the next 7 continuously. And the intention behind that prize is to take a development which might, if left to itself, take 20 years in terms of bringing wave and tidal power to commerciality and accelerate that forward into the next 7 years. And whoever, incidentally, wins that prize, and there are plenty of entrants, incidentally, will be incredibly well placed and to be a dominating player in the worldwide application of wave and tidal power. Again, it's a public finance initiative, which doesn't cost, I mean, in public finance terms, £10 million is not a huge amount of money in public finance terms. But in terms of industrial impact, that Saltire Prize could have a very considerable impact. Now, I know you have great cities and local authorities as part of this partnership, but the question I would have, whose responsibility would it be in the northeast of England to do something similar in one of your key industry groups? Whose responsibility would it be under current circumstances? And, you know, unless you've got a very quick and easy answer to that question, that's why you need a centre of influence and economic power.
Okay. There's some more questions. Hands up over there, I think.
First Minister Ian Malcolm, leader of South Tyneside Council. During your discussions with the Prime Minister on the referendum on Scottish independence, can you reassure me that there was no deal struck between the SNP and the Tories on their attempts to gerrymander a majority at the next election by reducing the number of Westminster MPs?
Okay.
Kate Welsh, I'm from Acumen, a group of social enterprises. And Alex, you were at the Social Enterprise Exchange in Glasgow last year and spoke very eloquently about Scotland's commitment to social enterprise. And I'm interested in the advice or experience you might like to share with us in the North East about the role social enterprise can play in the economy.
Yeah, there's one over there.
Norma Redfern from North Tyneside Council. And I just want to say, Alex, how much I enjoyed your talk. There are many people out here in the northeastern region who need hope, who need a way forward. And at the end of the day, there is much we have in common, as you've said. But I attend lots of talk shops with no sort of outcome at the end of it. And listening to what you've said tonight, how do you see the way forward for the Northeast and Scotland to work together?
Right. Firstly, Ian, no such discussions were had. Frankly, Ian, I cannot believe that the people of England would want to return the present omnishambles to office under any circumstances, and I hope you don't either. Not that I'm partial in these matters, ladies and gentlemen, but the social enterprise key role in the economy, absolutely, and for a whole range of ways. But if you take the people had some substantial doubts about some of the schemes in terms of training and work which were deployed by the last government and have now, after a hiatus, been started again by the present government. And we continued a scheme because we're not responsible for Social Security and therefore don't have the same basis if you take people off of benefits, but nonetheless we continued and started a scheme for the third sector. And it was quite interesting that people had much more confidence because obviously the argument from some people, from trade unions, from others, were the dangers of exploitation of people in terms of the wage subsidy and the lack of training. And it was interesting that people had much more confidence in the third sector's ability to deliver that scheme, which has done extremely well in Scotland. My only wish was that it was about 10 times the size that it currently has. So the third sector, incredibly important in terms of the work that's done, but also the provision of services in the future, of joined-up working. But I think incredibly important in terms of particular economic deployment in the economy at the present moment, which people can have confidence in. And gentlemen, Norman, don't underrate the importance of talking. Actually, talking can be quite important in politics, and talking is better than shouting, and talking is better than misunderstandings. But I would hope that in the sort of response that a number of leaders from this part of the world made to the initiatives that we were making in Glasgow yesterday, and in the commitment I'm giving tonight to speak to the key people here about how we can take initiatives and infrastructure together, that action will follow the talk. But by definition, if we weren't prepared to talk about it, then nothing would happen. So I've been described, if it's any reassurance to you, Norm, of many things in my life in politics. One or two of them good. But nobody's ever accused me of being all talk.
Thank you. I'm getting the signals that the main courses are ready, so I think we're going to have to sort of wrap up proceedings there.
Incidentally, that's another great innovation. Here in Newcastle, that you don't get your main course till you finish talking.
Sing for your supper.
There's an essential discipline there, which is very Scottish, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, it's not new to me either. In the interest of balanced reporting, the stuff about do we need a Ron Alex Salmond was in the Journal as well, the same report from Borderlands. But ladies and gentlemen, engaging, entertaining, can you please put your hands together for the First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond.
Could you join me in thanking the First Minister for his tremendous contribution tonight? It's great to see him. It's very interesting to hear what he's got to say. And we, in this part of the world, will watch the debate unfold in the next months and years and see how it goes and how it affects us. Alex, thank you very much for your time. Events like tonight don't just happen, and on behalf of the North East Economic Forum, I'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening. They're listed on the programme. We're very grateful to them, and we look forward to their continued support. And I'd like to introduce, if I may, Siobhan Brewster from Carillion Energy Services, who's going to say a few words on behalf of the sponsors. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I have spent the whole evening sat in that chair looking at the speakers as they come up and seeing how bright the lights are in your faces when you come here. And now I'm here, they definitely are very bright. So that was to be expected. But I'd just like to say, as Jamie started to say there, thank you very much, Alex, on behalf of all of the sponsors and all of us here tonight for your time and speaking to us in such an engaging and taking the time to do that. It's very appreciated, and I think everybody's enjoyed the evening tremendously. I would also like to as well, I don't think anybody's mentioned this earlier this evening, but express our congratulations on your recent achievement of being the longest serving First Minister. So congratulations. I think with a round of applause. And as several of us has commented on tonight, we certainly are living in challenging economic times. But as we've again talked about, with our established geographical, business and cultural links, there certainly are a number of opportunities over the coming years for the regions and Scotland to strengthen these ties even further. I think by working together, we can certainly prosper together. And the First Minister has given us a number of examples and I think challenges as well to drive those opportunities ourselves, which is very welcomed. For those who are unfamiliar with Carillion Energy Services, we are a Newcastle-based business and one of the largest independent energy service providers. And we're part of Carillion PLC, a FTSE 250 company. And as part of that and part of the comment earlier about seizing the initiative, I felt with the mentions around rail and road that I ought to, on Carillion's behalf, say we can certainly help with the 8 mile of road and support the rail construction as well. So happily to start those conversations. Certainly would be welcoming those. But the other piece really is about energy solutions as well. And I think for all of us, that is an increasingly important part of the mix that we all need to work towards. And we certainly work with our customers to help drive those costs down and drive carbon emissions down as well. And we do that a great deal in the North East and certainly in Scotland as well. And just to give an example of that that's relevant, I think, for this evening is Clean Energy Services in Scotland are responsible for a significant part of the Scottish Government's Universal Home Insulation Programme. And that is really a groundbreaking programme that makes insulation universally affordable, including free to householders on low incomes. And that's really helped the level of take-up there being just proceeding on to a higher level than we've seen before. And over the past few years, we've covered areas right across Scotland and are now up to completing over 1,000 loft or cavity installations a week in homes. And that makes a tremendous difference to making people's homes warmer and obviously for carbon emissions as well. So it's a great recognition of Scotland's determination and commitment to tackle climate change and to becoming a leading low-carbon economy that drives this. And importantly as well, creates green jobs and training in its wake, and I think that's very welcomed. And certainly at Clean Energy Services as well, it's something we try and drive to do, and creating opportunities for young people in the UK, in the regions, and to drive growth. And we have something like 2,000 apprenticeships at any one time. And one of those apprenticeships, the modern base, is actually in Glasgow. And I think we've recently reached nearly 400 waged apprenticeships in those regions. And hopefully we can continue to drive that in this region, in the North East, and continue to do so in Scotland as well. I think, you know, with your visit and the conversations that you've seen this evening, you'll see that this region, and because of a number of driving people in this room, has really established itself as a centre for low carbon excellence as well, and we've referred to wind and other renewable energy stimulations which are coming from here. And that is because the universities, the research centres, the businesses and local government have collaborated together to put the North East at the front of this exciting sector. And I hope that we really continue to see that happen, and that conversations that we've been having around and the talking shop element of that is continued forward into action. And we all can use our contacts and our thoughts and our drive and passion to make sure that those talking shops are turned into action and take on some of the suggestions and recommendations of the First Minister here, to which we've been very grateful and I think interested to hear. So just to summarise as well and repeat, we're again very grateful for your time, and I know it's very pressing, and I think there's been a lot of stimulating discussion, certainly at the table and other tables around, I'm sure, and let's hope that that goes on and continues into some real dialogues and real actions going forward. So thank you very much.